Morning, I rise, I stare at the sun. I know it is a blessing. Wash your hands, wash them before. When I look at where I'm coming from, I know I'm blessed, and I close my eyes and smile. Sometimes I feel like the richest man in Babylon, and I've done my best, so everything's alright inside. Oh, every morning, I rise, I stare at the sun. I know it is a blessing. So when the evening comes. Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Youth Voices. Of course, I am your host, Miss Edisa Eugene, and I am happy to be back with you this afternoon. However, this afternoon we are changing the nature of our program. As you all know, this week we have been observing Hurricane Preparedness Week at the studio, and so today's program will be following on that line. With that, today I have with me in studio a young man. Some might debate that. However, of course, he is young in my eyes, a young fireman from the community of Sufra, and he goes by the name of Mr. Claudius Brandis. So, good afternoon, Mr. Brandis.
Hi, good afternoon. Bon après-midi tout le monde.
It's a pleasure having you with us, and so I want to thank you for joining us today. Of course, we will be speaking to him on the line of his work, who he is. First of all, we'll start with who he is, what does he do outside of his normal working hours, and just get into the nitty gritty as to hurricane preparedness. So we're going right into it, Mr. Brandis. So just go ahead, tell the people who you are.
Well, I'm a firefighter of 17 years now.
Okay.
I am from the community of Soufre. I was born at Market Road. I was raised at Fourmenier. Before I became a firefighter, I was into football, track and field, into sports. Generally, outside of work, I do some farming, at times vending. Um, I am a father of three, a full-time parent of a 15-year-old son. So between work, the farm, and my son, that's the kind of person that I am.
Okay, great. So you just mentioned, so you have been working as a fireman for 17 years, right?
Yeah.
So it looks like there is a lot of experience and there is a lot that you could actually share with us this afternoon. So I want to ask you though, throughout these 17 years, what would you say was your worst experience as a firefighter?
Well, my worst experience, I would say, is in 2010, just before Thomas.
Okay.
There was this accident. I was actually off duty, traveling from Castries, where this surf by Canaries, the cemetery went up and it rolled over onto its back. I kind of witnessed it. I was in a bus heading in the direction of Soufre. The vehicle was traveling down towards Canaries.
All right.
And I had an injured knee. I was carrying a knee injury at that time. Witnessing that, persons crawl out, help out. I got out of the vehicle, assisted a few persons, and then when the vehicle exploded, I was like maybe 70 meters away,
Yeah.
and then I'm quite quick on my 2 feet, and I'm saying that the person who died just like a few feet away from the vehicle. If it wasn't for the injury, I would have been able to assist her,
Yeah.
and then I couldn't. And then every time driving that road or commuting along that road, I go past that very same place. Everything just keeps flashing back.
Yeah.
So this in its entirety was one of my worst experiences.
Okay, understood. And I mean, of course, if I was in your place, I would definitely feel the same, maybe worse, because I mean, I'm a female. Females are a little more emotional. But of course, I do understand. But yes, that was just to get to know you a little as a little firefighter. So we're getting into you and more of your work. What is the role of a day-to-day firefighter?
Well, on a day-to-day basis, well, currently our shift system is 24 hours, and then we work from 9 a.m. from the previous day to 9 a.m. the following day. So you spend
Okay.
24 hours in-house. We call it 24 hours of confinement. The only time you get to leave is only when somebody is in distress
Right.
that you might require ambulance service for, or require any firefighting expertise. Firefighter basically does multiple things. We work as EMS, we work as dispatchers, we work as chemical experts, where you'd have to respond to maybe chemical spills, oil spills, and whatnot. Our day begins at 9 o'clock with the morning briefing. It's always wise to know what transpired on the shift
Yeah.
that came in beforehand when you come in on duty, that you would know if you need to stock up on any specialized equipment, if you'd have to double check it, service it, and along that basis. So we have the briefing. The briefing is to basically get a synopsis of what happened prior to us coming in on duty.
Yeah.
And then at that briefing, you basically have the supervisor now detailing persons on the different units and on the desk. When that is done, you go in. If you're on the desk, you take over. On the desk, you relieve the person on the desk. The person working the desk would be the dispatcher or the control room attendant.
Okay.
That person's responsibility for the first 8 hours of the day is to answer phones, to handle correspondence, dispatch the appropriate units for the emergencies as they come in. That's the control room attendant. If you detail on the ambulance, there is what you call the driver and the
Yes.
attendant. The driver will be the person driving the unit. You would have to check and test his unit, check tire pressure, check oil, check transmission fluid, check coolant for the engine, and make sure that this vehicle is adequately ready to respond to the other emergency on the moment.
Okay.
The attendant now role is to provide patient care. Patient care in that when you get there, he would assess the patient. He would try and extract as much information from that patient as possible to present to a doctor when they get to a hospital, a nurse, or
Right.
anybody of equal or higher medical training, level training. So that person's responsibility on the ambulance would basically be to ensure that everything is well stocked at the back of the ambulance. So you have enough bandages, you have enough O2, you have enough let's just say AD pads, just to ensure that everything is in the highest state of readiness for the emergency, be it medical or trauma.
Okay.
And for the fire trucks, the same thing would happen with the drivers for the truck, but then the truck, it becomes a bit more tricky, where
Yeah.
you have specialized equipment like the jaws of life is what you'd use to cut vehicle metal on metal. You'd have cutters in the sawzall or circular saw, where you'd have to cut this vehicle. So you'd have to ensure that these these pieces of equipment are functional, it is refueled, it has adequate oil for working when the need arises.
Right.
For working the trucks, you need to check on what you'd call your self-contained breathing apparatus, SCBA. It's like a diving tank that would help you breathe in any environment which is not breathable, in terms of if this room is filled with, let's just say, toxic fumes,
Okay.
well, you would have to wear one of these. If the building is burning, that's what would you would need to enter a burning building. So you would have the person's detail on the unit would have to check individually their SCBA or the piece of equipment that they would be working with within the 24 hours.
Okay. So basically, it looks like a pact. How can I say? a packed day, 24 hours as well. So with everything that you just said, I took note of one thing where you spoke about on the ambulance, there is an attendant and a driver, right?
Right.
Um, just me. I think maybe they could have two attendants. In any case, have you guys had two attendants on board?
Well, yes. When you see we do recruit persons and you have new staff joining us, you would require some person with some senior level seniority to assist or to walk through the junior personnel.
Okay.
So we don't just take you fresh out of training school and just send you in the battlefield.
Yeah.
We have somebody's detailed within that period of time to literally teach you the ropes, to give you the little tricks, because when you come out of training school they teach you everything by the book.
Yeah.
But my years of experience have taught me that there are times that by the book it would mean a situation between life and death.
Yeah.
And then rather than just going through the door, sometimes you could just jump over the counter and find yourself next to the patient and provide an intervention where that could save the person's life. So these little things we try to assist with based on the nature of the call. If the person working the desk at the time um, does a good job in acquiring information,
Yeah.
when the alarm bell goes and the information is disseminated to the working crew, you, in your right judgment, like me being from Soufre, a call at Palmis, I would tell my supervisor, no, if it's that person, because of the topography of the place
Yeah.
and the accessibility and the carry, you would require maybe more personnel, so you would send an additional person.
Yeah.
If it's something like maybe near drowning or a piton calls, we do get calls on Gros Piton, and these are calls where it tests you mentally as a firefighter and physically. So then you would require additional hand. If if the shift permits, sometimes you dispatch an additional person to assist on calls like that.
Okay. Okay. I understand. I totally understand. Of course. So with that too, we're going right into linking hurricane preparedness with your work, right? So of course, you guys are very important when it comes to being available in terms of a disaster on a whole, right? In the past, as we mentioned a while ago, there has been the Hurricane Thomas, which really affected our community, as well as the Christmas trough. In my opinion, I would say that persons were not fully prepared because I think it's humanity where persons take disasters as a joke. They maybe behind their head say like, "Hey, it might not be that bad, so I don't prepare." So, with you being a fireman, what would you say to persons in terms of how to go about preparing?
Okay, let's just start and approach this question from a medical standpoint.
Okay.
You have persons with medical history, and these persons are persons that maybe require special attention, special needs.
Yeah.
Let's just take someone with COPD. This person requires oxygen. So, my advice and what we normally advise persons with any special medical condition is to find themselves close to a shelter where which is close to the hospital,
Yeah.
that if they require any additional um, any additional resource from the hospital, that the fireman or the firefighter wouldn't have to, during a storm or immediately after a storm, would have to go and clear a path to get to their residence and risk their life unnecessarily
Yeah.
to get you from your place, which is already, when you've done a capacity and vulnerability assessment, you would realize, well, okay, this tree is going to fall in the event of any trough or accident. Um, or because of that distance, maybe you might get land slippage, and it's going to pose a threat to accessing your residence. So we urge these persons to move to a shelter before any tropical storm, trough, or hurricane, and to always stock up on their medications so that even if they're not accessible, but they would have had enough medication or enough things to take care of their condition that in the meantime you won't have to venture or take this risk in that regard.
Okay, understood. So what else do you think persons can do in order to prepare? So you just looked at it on a medical standpoint.
Okay, from a firefighting standpoint, I mentioned capacity and vulnerability assessment. Um, it's always wise it's always wise they could just approach any firefighter or approach anybody trained in disaster preparedness or the first responders if nemo, and they would just take a casual walk through the community and would tell you, well, okay, this tree requires trimming um, over here. If this soil or this piece of terrace was to get waterlogged, you would get blockage here. So you could do two things: either erect a permanent retaining wall or just hold it up a bit
Yeah.
and just to prevent some land slippage, or just run a French drain through it to just get some of the water out of the soil and to rechannel it or redirect it. So when in doing the capacity and vulnerability assessment, you try and mitigate some of the hazards that would obviously um, challenge firefighters during and post any major natural disaster.
Okay. And you mentioned a while ago that you firefighters would advise persons with medical issues basically to try to get to a safe space, right? Before anything occurs. In that regard, does your organization assist persons in getting to shelters?
Well, we have been tasked with it. It is something that most persons don't know who to go to, and
Okay.
because of the readability of our vehicles, we have a van, 4x4. We have the ambulance based on the fact that you have persons who are not motorable, they are unable to sit, and you would only transport them on a stretcher.
Yeah.
So these persons, we are tasked with transporting them from their residence to a shelter. We also urge persons to know that they should know which shelter is closest to them
Yeah.
in any event. We also urge persons to clear drains, cut overhanging trees on power lines and onto their houses, onto their footpaths leading to and from their houses. We also urge persons to clear the gutter drains and do the very same thing that NEMO and the other agencies echoed.
Okay. Okay, very well. And so, since we mentioned the shelters as well, one quick question. I know Nemo is really the ones responsible for assessing the shelters. However, does the fire service have any input in terms of ensuring that this shelter is safe?
Well, yes, our shelters, we do have an input, and it comes with our FP department, our fire prevention department. You have
Okay.
these persons who come in, they do the very same thing that when you would do inspect a building and to get the inspection certificate. So these persons would come in and would inspect the building from a fire standpoint and say, well, okay, yes, from having inspected it from a fire service standpoint, this building is safe.
Yeah.
The onus on us sometimes is we're charged with getting water. For example, if there is a storage tank and it's empty post the natural disaster. So the onus would be called on us where we rendered the shelter a humanitarian service just by trucking water to the shelter, water for use for flushing toilets, washing of clothes, sanitation purposes.
Okay, understood. And we're continuing with this discussion. Of course, so far we've covered what really is your role as a fireman, how persons could prepare medically. We looked at how persons of the old age or more medical complicated stuff can access these places. Now, of course, in Sufra, recently, I am one of those who, I mean, I'm speaking on my own terms where I realized that the list put out from Nemo, to me, it wasn't updated in terms of the shelters, right? So what if there is a case where, for example, putting it point blank, on there we had the Suffer SDA church, which I know right now is not in the best
Yeah,
condition to
it's under
accommodate.
renovation, right?
Right. So with that, let's say we had someone who lives in the close proximity of that shelter, which is not conducive at this point. Um, how can the fire service now come in to assist that person in getting to the next point?
Well, if how can they file service?
Yes, because of course there are a number of shelters, but then um, persons might not want to go to a certain shelter. So, with you being more as an advisor, how would you advise them? So, would you say go to this one or that one?
Well, you in as with life, you have a plan A, and then if while plan A is in motion, you encounter some difficulties and problems, you should have plan B, C, and D also readily available.
All right.
So the onus now, I am not trying to jump the question. The onus now would have to fall back on the individual.
Yeah.
But however, if you can't make it to the SDHH, then there is a St. Isidore Hall, you know,
Yeah.
there is there are other places, other shelters that you should be able to have access to.
Yeah.
Um, the onus would be on you. How we would be able to assist if within the storm that within your assessment you decided, well, okay, you know what, I am going to ride it the storm out from home because I believe within my assessment that my roof will not be damaged, or
All right.
I am not flood prone, I am not in any way um taking line in any low lying areas or anything like that, and something goes wrong and you require our expertise. We try as much as possible not to go out within any storm, especially within dangerous conditions, because you would understand that your life first. You
Yeah.
understand? Yes, you want to assist somebody. Yes, you train to assist somebody, but your safety comes first.
I agree.
So if you now realize that, okay, as the responder or the firefighter, that your life is going to be more at a risk than the person you're trying to assist, then that would mean, okay, that is an abandoned ship for you.
All right.
That you'll have to say, well, okay, my life came first. I made that call. I saved my life. But you, the persons, and I want the people out there to understand, mobile open that, you have to, you uni pou sav sa ou vle fe avan dat. Ou sav el diye church la pa an ordi, pa an bon kondisyon, pou yo sa sorti la, ep ala dan lot kote.
Right.
Or so if they can go to a relative, to a friend, or someplace which is much better than the condition they are in, you
Yeah.
do it. We do wait for the 11th hour, because we do get at times get a lot of persons at the 11th hour run into the supermarkets, the little shops, the tea boutiques, trying to get things which should have been gotten from January, when the clock turns to a new year.
Yeah.
Yeah, because I advise persons what to do is that if you work on a monthly basis, you get two items. You buy two additional pounds of flour, sugar, rice in January. That's for the hurricane season.
All right.
You buy two additional cans of milk, tuna fish, and whatnot. Ou fè se bay sa just pou lè la, pou sav dat lè bay la kay fèt, lè bay la kay pase, ou si pase, dat ou pa bouzwen ay achè la an koye, pou ay fè an ti komisyon, achete an ti bougie, an ti lamp,
True.
an ti flashlight pou mette an kayo, ou hani kon.
I definitely agree. Huh? And so, with that, I have a follow up question. Um, in terms of the shelters, now you did answer me. You didn't realize that, but you did answer my question. Um, in terms of the shelters, again, in my belief, I think a lot of persons are not aware too of our shelters, and I say this because, of course, you would really find persons. Well, Nemo Nemo informing persons of these shelters only when we have something coming on. But year round, I think this is something that should be announced. Remind persons, hey, these are shelters? I mean, they do their assessments every whatever month,
No.
so I'm guessing maybe after then we can try to let persons know that hey, and so with that too, we can maybe try to plan. So if this place, for example, if the SDA church you live in that area doesn't work for you, where is the nearest place you can use as plan B? Like you said, you could have plan A, B, C. So maybe with that too, I think your team can come in order to ensure that, especially persons with a lot of medical complications, are aware. Their loved ones too, as to where they could take them if a certain place is not conducive.
Well, I do agree. I do share the same sentiments with you because it is something that I always advocate. If if I don't know if you could recall the fire, the JQ fire.
Yes.
A number of persons got displaced, and back then I was one of those who advocated that hey, to the Nemo personnel, you have these persons who got displaced. You need to activate a shelter for them, and a shelter is not only for any natural disaster. It
Yeah.
could be both natural and man-made.
Yeah.
You understand? Somebody in arsonist decides to burn a whole block down. You have 15 families displaced.
Yep.
Where are you going to house them? So right away, you would know that you could activate a shelter, at least provide them with accommodation for at least up to a month or 6 weeks, where these families now would know, well, okay, these persons, my daughter will go into live with her aunt for a couple of days. My brother is going to be there, and whatnot. So things like that, you need to know, and we need to activate the shelters. But the shelters now, we need to move away from churches and
True.
dance halls and these other buildings with multiple use as shelters. We need to have specialized shelters. Um, to me, the one of the buildings long overlooked, is the Sufre Town Hall. You
Mm-hmm.
only have the office space. This building could have been the bottom, maybe for the council workers, and the second, third, and fourth floor. You build it, and you build it as a shelter where you could house at least 4 to 8 families and have them dis- comfortably placed in that building
Yeah.
for any major displacement, be it man-made or natural.
Yeah.
Um, some other things we can look at and have advised is, we have these specialized containers. We have public lands in Sufre that if utilized properly, you could just come in, just place these containers down, with windows, showers already retrofitted to house families.
Yeah.
So you have these shelters specialized for persons with these kind of problems. Somebody with diabetes, somebody with any breathing problem, somebody who's hypertensive, somebody who's bedridden. Because I take it a bit further. You have the firefighters working with the roaming caregivers, and the roaming caregivers are the persons going into these houses and taking care of these persons who have nobody to
Yeah.
really look after them. Now, these roaming caregivers, they already have their own persons which at their home that they have to look after the household.
Right.
So we during a storm or post a storm, you would have to understand that since these roaming caregivers cannot go out to lend a hand or to provide care to these persons,
Mm-hmm.
we advise, we advise persons or their families to get these persons to a bus, to a shelter, and at least if you get them to the shelter, at least you could get the roaming caregivers who are actually genuine and actually look after the better interest or the best interest of the persons they provide the care. So they
Yeah.
could come into the shelters and assist in taking care of these individuals.
Yeah. Okay, so you give a whole lot of info there. And so, of course, I'm hoping that our listeners are taking note, as well as our persons who are also responsible for putting certain things in place, especially Nemo personnel, even the police too comes into play. So I'm hoping everyone is taking note as to how we can make certain things into a reality. I love the idea of transforming the town hall into a shelter. As you said, I believe it is a place which is overlooked and it could be used. And so, of course, I do agree again when you said that we should move away from the churches. Of course, while it is good to accommodate, they might be spacious. At the end of the day, we can utilize even a larger space, which I find could be more. And I think in St. Lucia, we too um, undermine what it is a shelter. To me, a shelter, yes, it is a place for you to come and you know if your place is not good enough, you come in. However, I think down here it's like we just drop the persons in there and we don't really know what's going on. At the end of the day, it's like we expect them to have beds, we expect them, even that too, I think needs to be worked on,
Yeah,
where maybe put in some nice beds. There are persons, yeah, they leave their home even though we're in a crisis too, they don't have proper bedding, nothing. So I believe, in my opinion, a shelter too should be comfortable, and down here we don't do that.
well, yes, and that is true. Because you need to understand you're going to ask persons to come into some place that is safe.
Yeah.
Yeah, but you need to make them comfortable. I won't tell you, well, okay, at the shelter you need to have free Wi-Fi,
Yes,
but
definitely not.
the
Yeah.
basic necessities.
Even
Uh,
security.
yeah, security is of paramount. You need to ensure that security is of paramount. You have men and women there, you have children,
Yes.
and you don't know what kind of persons that you may have in a shelter. So you need that level of security proof and that level of care for persons with special needs at a shelter.
Okay, great. So now that we've covered this, of course, we're continuing with our conversation as to hurricane preparedness. And so, I want to ask you, I know, as you mentioned, you've been working there for 17 years as a firefighter, right?
Yeah.
And so I'm guessing you'd be able to answer this question. Do you believe that, in terms of preparation for a hurricane, that your organization is fully equipped to go and help persons?
Well, we are fully equipped in terms of training because you have persons doing training year round.
Okay.
We have our in-house training. When you come to work, there are times that we at work where we would do simulation exercises. We would plan and we would challenge each other as to if this was to happen and you were in that situation, what would be your response plan? And we learn from these response plans that you have persons, for example, trained in swift water training. Swift water would mean strong current waters. Let's just decide the water decide to break it banks and you have persons strapped and you have technicians that will go into the water with safety gear and go out and rescue this person. So we are ready. But in terms of being ready, as with any other household, we would have to prepare our households to ensure that the persons now, when they are ready, when all leave is cancelled and that order is passed departmental wise, that you have adequate water at the station because the firefighters would require breakfast, lunch, dinner. They would
Right.
require water. They would require that they are safe at the place of adornment where they have been lodged. So the same thing we advise persons, we do in-house. We do ensure that we have our hurricane supplies in terms of food. If we need any specialized equipment, if the chainsaw needs to replace, if it needs servicing, we
Right.
do ensure that these things are put in place. If our ropes for guidelines where we go to assist persons and would require pulling out or think these ropes are tested and they are not damaged or they won't fail. So we
Yeah.
do a lot of these things
Okay.
departmental wise at the firehouse.
Very good. But in terms of, let's say, is there any equipment you believe maybe that could have made you guys a little more effective that you think you all should have?
Well, there'll always be because I would say, for example, I would love to fly a helicopter to go and rescue somebody,
Okay.
but because of financial constraints and um, we were unable to acquire a helicopter. As you may be aware, we have 9 stations on the island, so
Yeah.
that each firehouse on the island has its own helipad, an own helicopter where you could just go leave Soufrière, get to Font Saint Jacques, and just get people out of Font Saint Jacques, maybe 10, 15 persons via airlift. So we would love to have this piece of equipment, but it's not readily available. But in terms of accessibility, if we require a specialized piece of equipment, like let's say a backhoe, just
Yeah.
to clear off a portion of the road from Soufrière to Zeno, we work in tandem with Nemo, and then Nemo now would have a list of personnel with this equipment that we may need at the
Yeah.
moment. So they would contact these persons, and these persons would work hand in hand with us to get the task done, or any to get the expertise used at the time of need.
Okay, excellent. And so, of course, we are coming down with time in terms of our interview. But just before we end, I want to ask two more things. The final one would be a little checklist that we would be creating for our listeners in terms of what should be on your list as to what you should have in order to prepare for hurricanes. So I want you to start thinking of that. We will create a checklist. And but just before, I want to ask you though, many times there is a delay when it comes to firemen getting to our citizens, right? And I know there might have situations and different circumstances to can cause these delays. But what are some common reasons why there is a delay when it comes to you guys getting to persons quickly, even when during a disaster?
Let me first answer that question from two standpoints. Most of our persons living in or our community of Soufrière,
All right.
you would ask them a very simple question: what is the number for the fire station? And they will tell you 911.
Yes.
Now, with our system currently, when you dial 911 on island, the call goes to the fire service headquarters control room. The person you're speaking to may not know by bigger in Font Saint Jacques. So when you call and you say, well, okay, my mom is trapped, the river is the rivers are broken its banks by bigger in Font Saint Jacques, and she requires your assistance. That person do not know by bigger. But if you tell me by bigger, you tell anybody who works in Soufrière
Yeah.
by bigger, automatically you know that this landmark where you have to find yourself, where the emergency is. And when you call 911, here's what happens. The person takes down the information, he records it, he now forwards the information to Soufrière. It would be like, okay, I received a call from Mistress Jane Doe.
All right.
She said the river broke its bank at Font Saint Jacques by bigger. Her mother is in the house, she's trapped. Now, I don't know if you were aware of that exercise, that if you put 10 pupils, students in line, and you said the curtain is red, highly unlikely at the end when you reach the last student, the information would have been altered and it may not reach the 10th person just the way you said it.
Yeah.
So as with when you call for an emergency, that very same thing happens. Because like I said, the person may not know by bigger.
Yeah.
But to go further, like I was saying, the persons do not know the number for the fire station. Now, our our governments have not seen it fitting to zonalize our 911 calls.
And I think that is something which needs to be
And
worked on. Huh?
that's something that, well, it needs to be worked on, but they have not put these things in place. Or something very simple, just make all calls to the fire station or police station a free call. So you want to fight crime? Make the call to the police station a free call. So that when
Yeah.
the person calls to give information or to give a tip off, the police would be able to receive the information.
Right.
Moi, pa makai kay police because calls are available.
Oui.
But as with the fire service, if the call is free, then you know the information that you would want to give the persons for the ambulance or for the truck. It would be accurate information. That person now would be able to speak to you
Yeah.
and tell you, well, okay, you know what? We're going to dispatch an ambulance or the fire truck. The ambulance is coming. The people do not, I may not know who Jane Doe is. And Jane Doe might be a very popular figure in Fonse Jacques.
True.
But what would advise persons to do is that when you call, to at least send somebody to the road to actually stop the ambulance, to say, well, hey, right here, here is the person, follow me. So
Yes.
in things like that, you would find our response time and response plan being much, much, much better. But it
Yes.
is not so. So you find sometimes you'd have to radio, hey, I'm at Fonse Jacques, I got 2 million already, I come the area, I cannot find anywhere or Jane Doe lives. Or nobody can direct me as to where. So we have these little things. And unfortunately, we at times it's very challenging that you're sitting on a desk, that you got the call,
Yes.
and then you'd have to radio. And as you may be aware, with via radio communication, by the time there are times it gets
It
squelched,
reaches, yeah.
it itches and everything. Sometimes it comes from your very own cell phone. I found myself using my cell phone just to call my colleagues to say, well, hey, the person said she's wearing a pink top and you'll just pass her. And you'll be amazed that sometimes you pass the person and the person arm is well folded, or the
Yeah.
person is on their phone, and they expect you now to just automatically
No.
think
Yeah.
that the emergency is there. But my advice to persons along that line, they should familiarize themselves with their fire station number.
And what is it?
The Sufra fire station number is 455-6164.
So it is 455-6164.
64.
So of course, Mr. Brandis is advising everyone in the community of Sufre to just take note of the number, ensure that you know your community number. If you're not listening just from Sufre, of course, we have outside listeners. You are encouraged to know the numbers to your nearest fire station.
Well, it even works better because, as you may be aware, Sufra, the area code is the 459.
Yeah.
The reason we went with the 455 numbers is only because we could transfer. So you could call Sufre and you could be in Babono and
Yeah.
ask them to transfer you to the Babono station. And then that person would just press the short code and right away you're speaking to somebody at Babono.
Yes.
So you could just know one station number and just have them transfer you to the necessary station. If you feel calling a fixed line and you have a few cents on your phone, like maybe 60 cents, and
Yeah.
it's going to give you maybe 30 seconds on the phone, and you want to call a cell phone, the station does have a cell phone fail-safe number. It's 7120232 or 0234. So you could
Okay.
call either or, and when you call that call, it is being billed on your phone like it's a cell phone call you're making. So if you have minutes and it's digital minutes, you could call the station and be billed for making a cell call when you're actually speaking to somebody on a fixed line.
Okay. Now with that too, in my opinion, I believe you guys can try to make these numbers when I say available, of course, there are persons who know, but sometimes it's difficult for some persons who might be in some difficult time. And as you said, quickly, St. Lucians would just dial 911. So if there is a way that you guys could put this number maybe out there so it could stick behind the heads of persons to remember, hey, this is the number, that too I believe can help in getting direct communication, which would then prevent a lot of the delays that you guys would have.
That's where persons like you come into play. So when you on air, you could just make a nice little ad. Do you know that the Sufra fire station number is? And you just find a very creative way to put it out there. Four
Yeah.
five five six one six four. If you don't have enough credit, you could also call a fix, and then you put the
Yeah,
numbers out
you're
there.
already creating your own ad. Very good. But yes, of course, again, guys, please familiarize yourself with all numbers. That is essential, especially when you are in a disaster. And of course, as I said, we are running down with time. And so just before we end, we will try to create for you a quick hurricane kit that I believe person should have. And so I have created one for you. So if I'm missing anything, you would just add.
No problem. Go ahead. Let
Okay.
me hear what you
So
got.
I have non-perishable food. Okay, enough to last at least 3 days. Water, enough to last at least 3 days.
Days.
Something that persons don't have and they should have is a first aid kit. A first aid kit include any prescription or medication you might need. These are
Right.
especially for our medical persons. Personal hygiene items, sanitation items, your flashlights,
Flashlights.
batteries, operated radios as well, waterproof containers with your cash and important documents
Mm,
like your passport,
right.
you name it. Um, a manual can opener, lighter or matches.
Right.
Of course, you never know where you might end up. Books and magazine games. Why? In order to keep yourself entertained. You will get
Right.
bored, especially if you're at a shelter. Special needs items. So let's say you have a pet, your pet supplies, your baby supplies, if
Right.
applicable.
If applicable.
Yes. Um, of course, like we mentioned, yes, there are the shelters and so on, and so you should have an evacuation plan for your family. And that is something I think a lot of persons don't do, to sit with their families to say, hey, if there is a disaster, this is what we should do, or this is what we should not do.
Not do. If this was to happen, here is what we should do.
Yes. Also, in terms of securing our home, there are a number of things that we could do. So, cover all of your windows either with hurricane shutters or hood. We also suggest that although tape can prevent glass from shattering everywhere, be warned that tape does not prevent the window from breaking.
Breaking. Very well
Yes.
said.
If possible, of course, secure your straps or clips to securely fasten your roof to the structure of your home. Make sure all your trees are trimmed and clearing
Gatherings. Yeah.
guttering, sorry. Um, Reinforce your garage doors. Bring in all outdoor furniture. Of course, if the wind blows too strong, stay away from windows and doors, and close, secure, and brace internal doors.
Very well
Anything you
said.
want to add?
Yeah. Very well said. As with climate adaptation,
Mm-hmm.
most persons building right now, they do advise them to build a safe room in their houses where they away from windows and
Yes.
any, if a tree or anything was to fall into their onto their houses, that they in the safe room. But one thing we try to advise persons to get at least reflectable clothing,
Yeah.
a reflective
Yeah.
vest. So if you have to leave, and if you have to leave your house and then you're being because of evacuate your house, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
because of any unforeseen, that you do leave your house with reflectable clothing,
Yeah.
and then you do leave your house and you let persons know that, hey, you're going to be using this route. So planning, like you said in planning,
Yeah.
plan egress route, that when you're going to leave your home, that you're going to leave your home along that route, and try as much as possible to stick to or close to the route.
All right.
But as to your kit, it is
Great.
very much on point.
And so, one final section of the whole hurricane kit is in terms of power outage. In the event of, there is no power, what you could do. So, example, you can have your gas, make sure that your tank is full
Right.
in advance. Also, with your ATMs, in terms of ATMs, a storm is coming. I know persons usually rush, don't rush, but at least have extra cash. So if you didn't have time, go to the bank, utilize the ATM. Also, with water, try to fill in your bathtubs, your drums, ensure that you have adequate water.
Adequate storage, yeah,
Yes,
for water.
storage of water. Um, of course, we mentioned food, um, and so ensure that you have enough in terms of health and safety. If you know that your wires are exposed, especially to um, leaks, ensure that they are covered.
Right, you get a certified electrician to come and
Yes,
look after any electricals which may pose any fire hazard
yes,
or
to make the situation even worse.
worse. Right.
And so, of course, as you heard it, to our listeners and to those of you viewing us online, we just give you a little hurricane kit. Certain things that you can do and you should have in order to prepare for a hurricane. Again, as you know, we have been observing at the studio Hurricane Preparedness Week. And so I'm hoping that we all are taking in all of this information in order to ensure that we too are in check and ready in the face of a hurricane. And so we have come to the end of our program for today. And so I want to just say a special thank you again to you, Mr. Brandis, for joining me in studio this afternoon. Any last words that you would like to share?
Well, I would just urge persons, to be prepared and to be prepared always, not only in the hurricane season,
Yes.
because as you may be aware that climate change and the seasons are changing.
Right.
To always be prepared for any natural disaster and to stay safe during the hurricane season. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you. And again, thank you for joining us. I want to thank your supervisor for allowing you to come in.
Mr. Nelson.
Yes, Mr. Nelson, for allowing you to join us this afternoon. Of course, it was a great discussion. And I want to thank you, our listeners, and to those of you viewing us online, thank you for staying tuned in to your voices. Of course, I am your host, Miss Edisa Eugene, and see you next week.